that after some years you are back with us. And we welcome you actually in two capacities. First, you are president now of a national union government, and you really are embarking into using the full potential of South Africa, which, after all, is the economically strongest country on the African continent. And we all know that the African continent will be probably on the top priority list of global attention in the future. So we are looking very much forward to how your program to address particularly also infrastructure issues, reconstruction issues, what you will tell us about those programs. But second, and I would say particularly important today, is your presidency this year of the G20. We have a world which has a tendency not only to fall into two parts between the US and China, but we also have a tendency to fall into two parts between what is called the New South and the traditional, let's say, transatlantic or Western countries coming together in the G7. And here the G20 plays a very important role as a linking pin. And particularly, I think this year, this linking pin will be of utmost importance. So we welcome you in those two capacities. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. To all of you who are here present, greetings. We want to start off by thanking the World Economic Forum for giving South Africa this opportunity to outline what you requested us to do, what our priorities and objectives are for our presidency of the G20 that will be held in Johannesburg in November. But I also want to thank Professor Schwab for availing this opportunity to us. As you know, South Africa's G20 presidency follows on the heels, and may I say the hot and very successful heels of the G20 presidency last year of Brazil. And it will take place ahead of the G20 presidency of the United States of America, which has just inaugurated its president. Now, as a leading forum for international economic cooperation, the G20 is an institution that plays an important role in shaping the economic architecture of the world, as well as various economic institutions in the world. For the first time in the history of the G20, it will be hosted on the African continent, particularly following the admission of the African Union as a member of the G20. So we are rather pleased by this. It is a very important and most significant moment for South Africa, as well as for the African continent. But may I add, I would suggest that for the world as well, because it was in Africa where humans developed the capacity and the impulse for cooperation. Cooperation has been one of the key markers of human development, touching on many aspects of human life, survival, social organization, technological and cultural progress, which is what the G20 was established for. to foster cooperation, and to deal with challenges that the world faces. So cooperation is the bedrock of human civilization. Because without cooperation and collaboration between individuals, groups of individuals, peoples around the world and nations, humanity simply cannot progress. Now, as we confront the challenges of the 21st century, from climate change to pandemics, to addressing the challenge of poverty, to terrorism, from migration to artificial intelligence, we are in many ways once again called upon to harness that most powerful and most enduring of human attributes, mutually beneficial cooperation and collaboration. This, I believe, is a time of rising geopolitical tensions, unilateralism, nationalism, protectionism, and isolation, rising debt levels, particularly affecting poor countries in the world, and also importantly, the declining of a sense of common purpose. Yet, this is a moment when we should be standing together as a global community to resolve the problems that confront humanity by ending the wars and conflicts that are causing such hardship and misery to many people around the world. We are also called upon by the exigency of the moment to act together with greater urgency to halt the destruction of our planet. Now, this is a moment when we should harness also the abundant resources we collectively possess and the remarkable technologies that human ingenuity has produced to overcome poverty, to overcome inequality, unemployment, and especially youth unemployment, and the abuse of women once and for all. 33 years ago, the founding president of democratic South Africa, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, spoke here at Davos, and he said, "Our interdependence, bringing us together into a common global home across the oceans and the continents, demands that we all combine to launch a global offensive for development, for prosperity, and human survival." In pursuit of this objective, and in giving effect to the mission of achieving or implementing what Nelson Mandela said, the mission of the G20 South Africa will focus on three themes: solidarity, inequality, and sustainable development. It is South Africa's firm view that these themes can best be taken forward through the collective actions of a number of institutions like the G20, as well as various multilateral organizations, such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organizations, the World Health Organizations, financial institutions of the world, some of which should be reformed and be made more representative and responsive to the needs of the citizens of the world. We will seek to get the G20 to focus more on how we can enhance solidarity through collective efforts to ensure that in the pursuit of progress in the world and progress for all, no person and no country should be left behind. The rights and freedoms of one people cannot really be separated from the rights and freedoms of all people in the world. This is the foundation on which solidarity is built. And we will seek to spread this message and get it fully embraced by the G20. One of the greatest impediments to growth, to development, and to stability is the persistence of inequality within and between nations. The pursuit of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal on reducing inequality is as much an economic imperative as it is a social imperative. As the G20, we need deliberate as well as coordinated efforts to focus on inclusive growth based on responsive trade and investment to grow the incomes of poor countries and the poorest in society, and to ensure equal access to opportunities, especially to women and young people in the world who are the most badly affected by lack of progress. For nations to flourish, equality and prosperity must be available to everyone, regardless of gender, of race, religious belief, or economic status. In addition to huge gaps in economic capabilities and levels of human development, countries in the global south face a lack of predictable financing development, as well as climate change. They also face high levels of debt, and they are vulnerable to pandemics. Debt sustainability for low-income countries is one of the 4 priorities of South Africa's G20 presidency. In the world we inhabit today, the pursuit of equality and the practice of solidarity cannot be separated from sustainable development. We need to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It is therefore in the interest of all countries that they should act together and act with greater urgency to reduce global emissions, and for industrialized countries to support the climate actions that poorer countries or nations must necessarily take in line with the support of the decisions of the UN climate change summits, right from COP that was held in Paris, right through to the recent one. Another of South Africa's priorities for its G20 presidency is therefore to finance and to mobilize the just energy transition, to mobilize finance, that is. We will seek agreement on increasing the quality and quantity of climate finance flows to developing economies, as agreed at the various UN climate summits. We will continue to call on global financial institutions on the redirection of special drawing rights, which are left unused to a large extent. It is simply, in our view, not fair that over 60% of special drawing rights go to a handful of wealthy countries. And these drawing rights should be redirected to enable countries in Africa and other parts of the global south to realize their developmental aspirations, to enable them to invest in infrastructure, in industrial development, in education, in training, and in healthcare. We need to leverage private capital and use innovative forms of finance, as well as taxation, to raise additional resources for sustainable development in various countries in the global south. Now, global finance institutions should help to de-risk and support more financing for emerging and developing countries. We need to support country initiatives that are aimed at addressing climate change, such as the Just Energy Transition Partnership that South Africa has entered into with a number of countries of the global north. A number of other countries followed suit and also structured their own initiatives. But these need to be financed. As we accelerate the transition to low-carbon economies in a manner that is just and inclusive, we must also at the same time recognize the damage that climate change has already done and will continue to wreak around the world. In light of this, South Africa has therefore made the strengthening of disaster resilience as another of the priorities of its G20 presidency. The increasing rate of climate-induced natural disasters is affecting countries that can least afford the costs of recovery and rebuilding. And these disasters are also happening in developed economy countries. We've seen how in America the fires are raging, and even in Europe how floods have also caused a lot of devastation. But countries in the global north can recover quickly because of the economic strength that they have. In order to address the challenges that countries in the global south face, we believe that special financing and insurance mechanisms must be made available to scale up the funding for post-disaster reconstruction. Since the dawn of the industrial age, the benefits to humanity of economic growth have been achieved at the cost of environmental destruction. If we are to survive and to thrive as humanity, we must change this. We must change course. We must pursue development pathways that reconcile growth with urgent climate action. Another of South Africa's priorities for its G20 presidency is to harness critical minerals for inclusive growth and development. We need a G20 framework on green industrialization and investments to ensure progress towards a grand bargain that promotes value addition to critical minerals, particularly close to the source of extraction. We also need the development of low-carbon manufacturing value chains, which can support decarbonization and industrial development. There is a need to promote beneficiation and local value addition of resources at source, resulting in an additive rather than an extractive relationship. As minerals extraction accelerates to match the needs of the energy transition, the countries and local communities that are endowed with these rich resources must be the ones that benefit most. At the moment, they don't benefit much because the benefit flows out of their own countries to other locales in the world. We will use this G20 to champion the use of critical minerals through a program of green industrialization and as an engine for growth and development in Africa and the rest of the global south. As this will be the first G20 summit that is held in Africa, it is for us a valuable platform to demonstrate Africa's promise. Many agree that Africa is the next frontier of global growth and productivity. The African continent has an unrivaled natural resource endowment with the youngest population of all continents. Africa continues to be an expanding market for goods and services. The African Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to really change the economic and social fortunes of our continent. We will seek G20 support for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Adjustment Fund that will enhance inclusive growth, sustainable and regional integration as well. We will look to consolidate various G20 initiatives related to Africa into a flagship agreement for cooperation that is focused on implementation of investments in productive sectors in Africa in areas such as infrastructure. Many of you would know that infrastructure is propelling Africa's growth at the moment. We seek investments in development of skills that will also fuel this infrastructure revolution, particularly for Africa's youth and the economic empowerment of the women of our continent. In the health sector, we would want the G20 to support the production of pharmaceutical products such as therapeutics, as well as vaccines to deal with pandemics. The digitization of the continent, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence, will enhance trade and development, and they are key enablers that we want to see fully developed. Through its G20 presidency, South Africa is well positioned as a country to advance global cooperation and to build partnerships for growth as well as for development. This is so because South Africa has a rich history of inclusive dialogue and common action. Over the last few years, the South African government has been working very closely with social partners in business in South Africa and with labor and with civil society to address the key national challenges that face our country, as well as to drive inclusive growth. And this cooperation culture and the approach that we have developed over many years has taken us to a higher level. And with the establishment, particularly of the Government of National Unity that you referred to, following the elections that were held in May last year, the Government of National Unity, or the GNU as we call it, made up of 10 political parties, a government that we were able to set up in exactly 4 weeks, when many other countries, particularly in the global north, take up to 1 year, and we did it in just 30 days. So this has been vital to stability, as well as inclusive governance in our country, and has largely contributed to greater interest amongst investors in South Africa's economic prospects. And I do believe that some of those investors who are having a fresh look at South Africa are also here, and we are going to be interacting with them. The seeds of human progress were sown in Africa. In Africa, the earliest forms of cooperation were forged and developed. As the leaders of the G20 return to Africa, we make a call that we all harness these essential capabilities that will make us take action to build a better and a fairer world. We intend that the G20 in Johannesburg this year should really be a forum where cooperation and collaboration amongst the leading economies of the world will be taken to a higher level. Acting together, we should build an inclusive, just, and equal world in which all may prosper, leaving no one and no country behind. So I look forward, Professor, to welcoming you to the G20 in Johannesburg later this year. And even if you do not participate, any of you do not participate in any of the 130 G20 related meetings, because that's how the G20 works. It builds up to the Leader Summit, which will be held later in the year through the various meetings in finance stream and trade stream and many others. I'd like to invite you to come, even if you do not participate in any of these meetings, just to come to South Africa and come and see South Africa for yourself, the most beautiful country in the world. So I invite you to come, and thank you very much.
Mr. President, you have shown us in a very comprehensive way what you want to achieve, a better and more inclusive and more sustainable world under your leadership at the G20. And I can promise you I will be in South Africa. But we spoke about the potential and the role of the G20. We have very little time, and I want to acknowledge the strong participation of your government, which gives an opportunity to follow up on many of those issues and many of the opportunities of cooperation with your country. But to conclude our session, I just have one question, very simple question. Mr. President, if you would explain to a major foreign investor why he should invest into South Africa at this particular moment. 3 reasons.
I would say, besides it being the most beautiful country in the world, I would say...
I agree, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And you do come for holidays as well. There are quite a number of reasons, and some of those reasons are just to come to see the progress that we have been making. After years of some decline, we've been making progress in implementing our reforms. We've embarked on a major program of economic reforms, and of course the political stability that we are now forging ahead with supports those reforms, and we're focusing on economic growth, job creation, and making our country more attractive to investors. Many people are now saying we are now prepared to look at South Africa anew because we have resolved our energy crisis. We went through a debilitating energy crisis. A few months ago, we've now gone through almost a year without having any blackouts. And a number of countries around the world do have their own blackouts, but ours was a major crisis. We've solved that, and largely through the reforms that we've embarked upon to reform our energy sector. And we're also reforming our governance, as well as dealing with the corruption levels that had risen to a high level. And we are addressing that, and in sorting out our governance, we do believe that we make South Africa a lot more attractive. And I do want to lay stress on the partnership that we have crafted with business, with labor, and various community organizations is a solid one. And it's a compact that we've put together that is helping us as a country to address many, many challenges. There aren't many countries that I know of in the world where there is long-term cooperation between business, labor, and government at such a close range. And we can count many areas where progress is being made in that regard. And that talks to stability, and that talks to promise for greater economic governance, greater economic growth that South Africa is now leading the way in. And also the important role that we play as a country with regard to our continent, particularly when it comes to trade. We are the most industrialized country on the continent and continue to say that we are the gateway into Africa. By dint of being the most industrialized country and with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, that opens up many opportunities for investors to utilize our country, and without downplaying any country on the continent and other countries as well, to be the launchpad of their investment processes. So South Africa is ready for investments, and we are pregnant with great promise going forward as a country.
Thank you, Mr. President. We wish you a continuation, and I may say, and certainly I'm correct in saying so, an acceleration of your successful path, using the full potential of South Africa and the continent, and all our best wishes accompany you for achieving the results which you have described to us in your G20 presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, let's express our appreciation for the presence of the President of South Africa, of the Republic of South Africa, and the G20 here this afternoon. Thank you.
It's the dawn of another new year. Africa strides into 2025, brimming with promises and wary of challenges. Latest growth projections paint a cautiously optimistic picture. South Africa's G20 presidency appears to push Africa's fate in its own hands. But uncertainties also linger, from food security to political instability and the future of AGOA. This week on the program, we look at what lies ahead for Africa in 2025, the opportunities, the challenges, and the strategic decisions that will shape the continent's journey. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. And we have a lot to unpack. So let's now bring in our panel of experts. Joining me in Nairobi, Dr. Adere Kavins, international relations expert. In Yaoundé via Zoom, David Otto Endele, Director, Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. And in Toronto, also via Zoom, Ovigwe Eguegu, Policy Analyst at Development Reimagined. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you all. I want to first get a start by looking at the specific events to look out for in 2025. David, what issues are likely to chart the path for Africa in 2025?
Well, I think from a security point of view, I think, what we are likely to experience is, of course, a continuous, push towards peaceful settlement of the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, specifically in Sudan. That is a major, crisis within the African continent that affects a lot of regional and fragile states. So I think the geopolitical tensions again that exist between the states in the Sahel. I'm talking about the likes of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Which threatens the unity of ECOWAS, which is the West African regional bloc. That is an area that one needs to also watch very closely. From a democratic point of view, Beatrice, I think we have seen a huge increase in what I call the death of democracy in some of the African countries that I mentioned earlier on, where coup d'etats were the order of the day. A clear indication that Africa still needs to find a system of governance that reflects the continent's own unique dynamics, a system of governance that reflects the youthful population, a population that accounts for over 75% of the entire continent of 54 countries. It's a very, huge number. So I'm looking, and I believe so many others are doing the same, to see how Africa in 2025 is going to, come up with sustainable solutions. But not to forget, Beatrice, we're looking at new partnerships, how Africa is going to increase its relations with China and how that is going to shape the geopolitical space and remove that hegemony that has existed for over the years. So it's going to be an interesting dynamics. Let's see how that goes. Don't forget climate change, Beatrice. Over.
So, Ovigwe, your projections for 2025?
Just to build on what David just said earlier, there is a lot of things to consider. The security perspective, from the politics and governance perspective, also the economic perspective as well. If you look at the IMF projection for 2025, the growth forecast for the continent, it's 4.2%, which is an increase of increase from the current 3.6% in 2024. That's a huge jump, and hopefully, with economic growth increasing in that manner, if it actually turns out the projections are correct, we'll see an increase in quality of life chances, employment for youths, and the demographic dividend that is started to be on the continent can then yield many outcomes apart from just economic benefit, but also social stability, which is very, very much tied to the ability for people to be able to put food in their stomachs and increase the quality of life. So from that perspective, it's one. And then just like David was mentioning, the security dynamics as well, that is very, 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 very crucial. One area where, other than the areas he has mentioned, we did the DRC, and the Great Lakes region, that is still a hot area on the continent. Lots of fragility in that space, and also a key part of the this new emphasis on critical strategic minerals and how that would lead to development of new industries, being that region of the world, of the continent, is very, very rich in those minerals. And many of the projects, whether the U.S. Lobito corridor or the Tazaria, that will be leading to all of these, the mining process and export, would actually take place in a context where there's stability. But one other thing to add on the economic front is there is an increased push from the continent towards refining these natural resources. as a way to increase the resource beneficiation, because the continent, of course, over decades have realized that you just cannot get the most of your resources if you keep exporting. The mine to port doesn't work, and we want to see a continent where there is an emphasis on refining, and we're seeing some of that. In Nigeria, for instance, there is a 4,000-ton lithium processing mine in Niger State, which is an investment from China. We're seeing those type of investments also in Zimbabwe on lithium processing as well. So there is a positive here and there, but overwhelmingly, it's still a mine to port model. And the continent is looking at how to improve and increase that. And you can hear that from all of the leaders across the continent.
We will come to that in a bit, Ovigwe, but let me just get an input from Dr. Adere. Your take on 2025?
Well, 2025 is going to see some continuation of what is happening today. I foresee a strong geopolitical tussle between China and the United States in Africa, for example, with Donald Trump assuming office. China-Africa relation is suddenly on the table to be improved further in 2025. Already, the leaders of the two sides have set out a very important framework for collaboration going into the new year through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. All those ideas around investments, intercultural exchanges, industrialization, agricultural modernization, poverty alleviation, and eradication demonstration centers, as well as investments in green energy. On the economic front, I foresee certain sectors attracting higher interest. For example, investments in renewable energy, the Innovation and FinTech Center, with an increasingly young and dynamic youth in Africa that is increasingly engaged and talented. I think we're going to see a more focus on investment in that area. Agriculture and health are still going to be top attractions for investment. And I think as projections for the continent's growth increases, it means that we are looking forward to additional jobs created, especially for the young people of the continent in the new year.
So, Ovigwe, I want to come back to the IMF regional economic outlook that you mentioned for sub-Saharan Africa. It is projecting a modest pickup of Africa's economic growth to 4.2%, as you've alluded. Going by the challenges of 2024, which sectors do you think are going to witness this growth?
Just like the previous speaker was mentioning, the agricultural and food sector is one of those sectors where they've consistently been in growth. So I think that is going to continue to 2025 because, of course, global investors are seeing that there is a huge youth bulge on the continent, and these people need to be fed. So we're seeing a lot of investment into the agricultural sector, but also there's a lot of investment and activity even into other traditional commodity sectors as well, whether it be oil and gas, mining and mining sector for minerals, because the demand for things like bauxite or bauxite alumina, also for copper, and all of these sectors are actually experiencing huge interest from investment because of the global demand. But one other sector that I think is also seeing some growth is the services sector as well. So all of this put together, hopefully, is going to create that economic dynamism that the continent really needs. And with that dynamism, we will see an increase in quality of life of people on the continent.
So, Adere, let me come back to you on the geopolitical front. South Africa takes over the presidency of the G20. How is South Africa's, presidency, for that instance, of the G20 going to pan out? How is that going to affect Africa's voice on the global scene?
No, it's a good thing, Beatrice, that the G20 presidency is being led by South Africa for 2025. It's actually an opportunity for South Africa and Africa as a whole to harmonize their voices, especially in this platform. The G20 is the most important economic or platform for economic engagement in the world. And so with Africa getting a chance through South Africa to really put forward its priorities and desires on the table, and strategically navigate the growing geopolitical tensions in a manner that can deliver, tangible results for the continent. I think that is very significant. There are many areas that South Africa has already indicated that it's gonna, pull its weight behind in terms of investments across Africa, in terms of giving young people opportunity and skills that they need for the 21st century world. In terms of trade, opening up trade opportunities in line with the aspirations of the Continental Free Trade Area, reducing the chances of conflict in the continent. And so these are some of the priority areas that I think under the South African presidency, the African continent can galvanize a single voice and see how to attract international partnerships that can deliver on these aspirations.
David, is this the year that we are going to see more steps being made towards a new world order?
Well, I think, it's that year, we've rightly pointed out that, the new world order reflects, that level of engagement and balance and the demise of the hegemony that used to happen. And significantly, as my co-panelists have pointed out, having a country like South Africa leading the G20 could potentially be a significant change, but it all depends on the kind of support that the other African countries, would throw behind South Africa. I believe that, Africa has always been that El Dorado that the entire universe cannot do without. And what Africa needs, is to have that collaborative and coordination that requires in all sectors, whether you're talking about the green economy or you're talking about agriculture, infrastructure or investment. Africa stands out amongst all these other continents. But in order to realize its potential, as I mentioned earlier on, we have to be able to establish policies that, answer some of the security, stability or instability issues. Right. Talking about social stability, the political instability, geopolitical, economic stability, all these various areas must be addressed, Beatrice, and must be addressed equally. If you leave one out, what then happens is that becomes the weakest link. We have to, as a continent, realize that we can take, matters into our own hands. We can find the right partners to do business with, the likes of China. We can, use our diplomatic leverages. We can use the leverage of our population workforce. We can use the leverage of the level of natural and human resources that we have. I mean, look at the projections that IMF and the World Bank made. The African continent itself, is projected to grow above 3%. That tells you, Beatrice, that, we stand a very, very good chance, albeit the fact that, we still have a high level of political instability as concerns, our democratic processes. So,
Ovigwe, I want to look at some of these unique opportunities of a multipolar world, because we have talked about de-dollarization and a multipolar world in 2024. What unique opportunities does a multipolar world present for Africa in 2025, particularly with these discussions around the BRICS currency and currency swaps?
When the BRICS is talking about global trade, and when we look at the actual project of the BRICS, they're not really trying to attack the US dollar or create a BRICS currency, as it were. What they are really keen on is to put forward a basket of currency whereby, countries within the BRICS and even outside of the BRICS can trade. For instance, Tanzania has which is not even a BRICS member, has signed an agreement with India to trade with their local currencies. You have countries doing this all over the world. If Brazil wants to trade with Nigeria, why do we have to use the dollar to do that, right? So why do we incur transaction costs of using a third-party currency when countries can use their own currencies? And this is coming from long-term weaponization of the US dollar, which has been used many times against countries across the world. So that is why we see this enthusiasm and interest in creating an alternative system that we complete with tools of trade, not just even a basket of currency, but also payment mechanism, an alternative to SWIFT, for instance, which is the dominant platform that is used now, so that countries are able to trade freely without fear of sanctions or their trade being impacted, political aspirations of certain countries. And that would be very, very key for African countries, not just African countries, but countries around the world. It's important to be able to be part of creating a more, you could say, democratic world order, whereby countries across the world are able to build their economies without fear of sanctions because of their foreign policy positions on certain issues.
Indeed, gentlemen. On that note, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll continue looking ahead, exploring the opportunities and the challenges that await Africa in the new year. Do stay with us.